She wreathed her arm in blue light, fully aware that she could no longer activate another formula. Her labored breathing refused to settle. She stood in the center of the basement without being spotted even once. She had managed to make it all the way to the central pillar. It was a 100-meter dash in 13 seconds flat. Undoubtedly a new personal best. She spurred on her weakened heart, knowing full well the fate that awaited her.
入れば追ってくる。地下に行けば逃げられない。当然よね。最後まで逃げ回ろうなんて虫のいい話だった。
Hindsight was 2020. The castle was only a minute away from collapsing completely. If they stayed here, they would both be crushed by the rubble. The puppet certainly did not care. With no life of his own, its sole concern was the elimination of his target, Aoko Azaki. Indeed, the enemy had been willing to die from the start. She resented her own lack of resolve. It wasn't like her to tuck tail and run from an opponent that didn't fear death.
Vivo insomni, solitare putoresque inferis. Victius meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies. Teobeam.
そもそも自爆覚悟じゃないあれ。六足歩行とフィンの一撃は使いすぎよ。もう呪詛による魔力補給じゃ間に合わない。
Such a potential motion device was only as good as its ability to regulate its energy consumption. Using so many functions at once meant it was burning through fuel quickly and losing the ability to process the curses that powered it. It was using all the functions it had been given to achieve its aim. This was the pride of a tool. If such things could have ego, those endowed with sentience could never hope to understand. The beast born to do nothing but run would burn any human who faced its resolve.
ほんともったいない。こういう無茶をするのは姉貴だけかと思ってたけど、いるところにはいるもんね。
Aoko did not intend a sacrifice play here. She respected her adversary now, and she was done regretting her choices. There was no time to waste.
行くわよ。ここできっかり。
Aoko had every intention of paying it back double for what it had done to her. The energy Aoko had accumulated exploded out of her right leg. She aimed for a single thing, a head-on attack. The enemy responded with a lethal curse that reached for her heart like a set of talons. Humming with power, it meant to rend Aoko's heart and burn itself out in the process. As soon as she saw it, Aoko kicked the floor as hard as she could. Her long hair swayed through the air as she flipped aside. This lateral movement almost sent her tumbling to the ground, but a quick swing of her arm allowed her to regain her balance. Shot grazed her arm, the curse scorching her left shoulder. She did not flinch. Aoko knew she could hold on as long as she continued to avoid a direct spin shot.
Snap.
Off balance and in pain, it took her half a second to recover. The moment she raised her head, she deflected the attack with a fist full of magical energy. If the puppet had a will of its own, its eyes would have popped right out of its sockets. It would have been floored, shocked at the strong will that allowed this girl to perform a series of moves like this. Ako's response was instantaneous. While her power was not sufficient to completely redirect the arm's trajectory, it was enough to deflect it harmlessly past her hair. The chant became a curse that robbed Aoko of her vitality. Did it still have something left in the tank, or was it actually indignant? Whatever the reason, Aoko was easily able to resist its weakened defensive maneuver. her right leg, pulsing with magical energy, shot up into the puppet's chest from below. It was much lighter than Aoko anticipated, or rather she felt little resistance. An automatron's weight was determined by its internals, the size of its power source. Ironically, it was the superiority of his music box engine that would prove to be its downfall.
Venite, venite, venite. Meum sepulchrum, venite.
A stuttering curse. Having taken the full brunt of Ako's kick, the puppet bounced from the ceiling to the floor, collapsing in a heap. Its internal construction had been wrapped by the impact, leaving the drum of the music box that powered the puppet wrapped as well.
恨むなら設計者を恨みなさい。ダイナモの一つでも積んでいれば、もうちょっとは重たくなったでしょうに。で、
Part of the ceiling came crashing down in front of Aoko, snapping her back to her
ところで
senses.
今、どうやってぶっ倒したんだろ
She was so stunned by her own victory that she forgot the house of mirrors had already begun to collapse.
う。こっちの方がやばかった。
There was no time to relish in her victory or pity her opponent, not unless she wanted to meet the same fate. As the situation stood, she found it hard to imagine getting out alive.
急げ、ダッシュだ私。
She clapped herself on the cheeks to motivate herself anew. This was her bounty for finishing the battle in a matter of seconds. Her breath ragged with excitement, Aoko ran for the exit. And the question is, did she make it out? Okay, we know she's going to make it out, but that's unscathed. The collapse was intensifying by the second. Having lost its support pillars, the castle was buckling under its own weight.
この邪魔。
Escaping from the basement was proving to be no easy task. While she was taking the shortest route possible through the maze, she was nearly crushed by a falling piece of the ceiling along the way. This was the second time, no, third, she had to deal with fallen rubble along the way. She destroyed the debris on the stairs with magic bullets as she ran. The automatron's jamming had long since worn off. The earlier attack had damaged the vast majority of its functions. And goodbye. Ako's breathing was heavy as she ran. Desperation sparked her brain into overdrive. The ceiling seemed to be collapsing in slow motion. Life seemed to flash before her very eyes. Every second stretched into 5. Her frayed nerves made it hard to tell the time. There was debris riddled throughout the stairwell, forcing her to crawl up it. She emerged from the destroyed basement into the collapsing first floor. That the plaza was still traversable at all was a miracle in itself. Unfortunately for her, the crucial path to the exit was still intact.
よし、ついてる。
The corridor to the entrance was still intact. The basement maze only extended as far as the plaza, so the entrance corridor wouldn't collapse. Only the ceiling would cave in, leaving the scaffolding surrounding intact. She got herself this far by telling herself repeatedly that fate would decide whether or not she reached the plaza. Her gamble paid off. It was her lucky day. All she had to do was muster the last of her strength to keep moving forward until... She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Was it naivety? The sense of responsibility? She pushed aside the image that popped in her head and continued running down the corridor.
言っとくけど、時間合わせの余裕はないわよ。そんな上等な作戦じゃないし、お互いできることをやったら最速で出口に向かいましょう。
That was 5 minutes ago. At the time, Sojiro had nodded with intimidation, and Aoko had not bothered to ask herself why.
何様だったの私。今は走ることだけ考えろ。
This corridor was giving out too. If she were to look back, she was sure she would see the building collapsing in on her. She was also sure she had no time to waste doing so. Her luck was fading as fast as the building's structural integrity. It was a small miracle that she had escaped serious injury up to this point, and she could not afford even the slightest slip up. An ankle sprain, loss of balance, or even a sneeze would be fatal. A simple pat on the back was enough to end it. So naturally, there it was, clear as day. From the despair of the stairway, death had risen to take her down with it. The corpse that had crawled its way up from the depths of hell itself. It was still operational, and it was still armed with curses. It had crawled after her, watching as Aoko desperately tried to save herself. As the puppet's arm shot forward, while Aoko did not turn to meet it, she could see its reflection in the mirrors. Our salvation. Extend, extend, extend. This time she could not dodge it. There was absolutely nothing she could do. The puppet, with her face, sank. For a moment, she could not believe her eyes. It was the last thing she expected to see.
しつこいぞお前
Fire extinguisher. A fierce expression adorned the face of the boy who had been waiting in the plaza as he smashed the puppet's outstretched arm. Anger really did not suit him at all. His weapon of choice was a fire extinguisher. He must have searched the maze for something to use as a weapon. No, never mind that. It was too crazy to compensate, but had he stayed behind for her? Aoko stopped the feet she had sworn would never stop moving and extended a hand out to him. Sojiro tossed the fire extinguisher aside and took off running. Like, yeah, that was his last ditch. He won't survive that now. Pieces of ceiling continued to collapse like dominoes. They kept moving with dust and dirt following in their wake. Their shadows raced through the collapsing corridor with all their strength. The castle was in the torrents of death. The castle is gone, no longer standing. And watch, we're going to somehow see Alice outside the building. Wouldn't surprise me. With a massive crash and a cloud of dust, the final chapter on the fairy tale that had been Kitsy Land came to an abrupt end. This duel to the death was over. For a moment, amidst their swirling emotions, any past enmity was forgotten. The two collapsed on the lawn and basked in strange solidarity. During their ears subsided before long. A tremor of such magnitude seemed impossible in an amusement park like this. As sounds of destruction echoed across the park, Aoko addressed the individual at her side. Of course, that's if he's alive. While the click of her tongue was adorable, the meaning behind it was anything but.
青崎あいつどうなった
見ての通りよ。今頃バラバラ死体になってるんじゃない
Sojiro sighed, not wholly relieved by her frank response. His reason?
でも、そんな心配より自分の心配をした方がいいと思うわよ、しずきくん。
He wasn't out of the woods yet, after all.
青崎子供の頃はいじめっ子だっただろ
可逆趣味はないって自負してるけど、 それで今の自分の立場分かってる？
She sat up and smiled. Sojiro hung his head in shame, wondering why her kind tone and expression were so chilling.
面目次第もございません。
かしこまってもダメよ。あの提案には大前提があったわよね。これは取引だって。あなたが役に立つのなら見逃してあげるっていう。
わかってる。だから面目ないって言ってるだろ。
Sanjiro made a show of avoiding her eyes, like a pouting child. Aoko was taken aback by the sulking display. Perhaps he was angry at himself rather than her. He was not mad because she would not let him go. He was mad that he had not done his part. Aoko sighed for what seemed like the millionth time that day. She could not figure out what surprised her more, his unconditional kindness or her naive approval of it.
じゃあ覚悟はできてるの？
そんなのはできないけど、約束だからな。結局は何もしていないし。
It was certainly the case that he had failed to do any of the things she had expected of him. But just then she glanced back at the collapsed house of mirrors. What had he done after failing so spectacularly? He had searched for the extinguisher so he could use it as a weapon, and waited patiently in the plaza as the maze collapsed all around him, just because he thought it was wrong to leave her behind. It was a foolish choice and the exact opposite of her choice to run toward the exit without hesitation.
ま、それでよしとするか。
She was satisfied, even if she was shocked at how naive she was being. It was true that he had saved her. She smiled inwardly, admiring, if only for a moment, the bravery he had continued to show in the face of such extreme circumstances.
役割は果たさなかったけど、アフターケアは合格だし、約束は守らなくちゃね。
With a nod, she pulled herself to her feet.
約束は、いつか守ってもらうとして。
The girl tried to keep a straight face as she offered a hand to the boy still laying
結
on
果
the
は
ground.
どうあれ手助けしてもらったし、特別サービスってことで、今夜はもう手を出さないであげる。
She bashfully averted her gaze. Though her profile appeared different than it had in the past, it was clearly still the face of a vibrant girl he met the day he first arrived in town.
何？
As if she had felt his eyes on her, she shot him a frowning
い
glare.
や、突拍子もないけど、青崎は律儀だなって。
He took her outstretched hand. Feeling his weight as she pulled him up, she could not help but think that he was about the last person she wanted to hear that from.
ところで、今夜はって言うけど、明日からは？
さ、その時になったら考えるわ。
She shrugged her shoulders if she was not sure herself. Her response was so unlike her that it made Sojiro smile. Was it the solitary of having escaped death together, or the fleeting camaraderie that made him do so? It might have been for this night only, but the air between them was kind and gentle. A lot had transpired, but the midwinter nightmare had come to an end. The pair had overcome many trials and tribulations could now leave the mirror realm in their wake. But before that,
随分と身勝手ね。それはあなた一人で決めていいことだったかしら、青子。
and there's Alice. I had a feeling Alice was still going to show up. It was the voice of a beautiful songbird and merciless machine all rolled into
ア
one.
リス。
Her voice quivered as she spoke the name. The lady in black made her presence known. The night was not over yet over. Her name was Alice Kuragi. She was a witch whose name struck fear into the heart of Aoko, an avatar of the night who would allow no witnesses. Oh, great. What's Alice going to do now? Let's see if there was anything else that we missed. Nope. So far, we're all as we should be. So yay, now we deal with more. Let me at least save right now. Oh, I gotta actually push escape. Melody stirred in the motion, like nostalgia within them. Something once familiar but now lost to this world. They believed beyond a shadow of doubt that it would play for all eternity. From opening stanza to final coda, it was a mysterious siren song, merry yet longing, that heralded a return from dreams to reality. The night shook. Song was spun. Now their lost paradise was unearthed. Abandoned dreams, forsaken idols, they all responded to the cry of the blue cat. The name of that bell was Dibble Diddle Banquet of the Night. All fables made possible are marvels made real by magecraft of Alice Chronology. More magical than magic itself. Oh, great.
随分と身勝手ね。それはあなた一人で決めていいことだったかしら、青子。
Alice sat perched atop the clock tower like a black bird of ill omen. She smoothed the ruffles of her skirt as if she were preening.
アリス、
There was tension in Akka's voice as she lifted her head. The calm atmosphere from the moment prior had long since been shooed away by Alice's gaze.
あの子確か
Sojiro searched his hazy memory. He could not clearly make out her face in the distance, but he was sure he had seen her around town a number of times. Where and when eluded him, however, as the tension in the air kept him from connecting all the dots.
驚いた。随分と仲間思いになったのね、アリス。今夜は私に任せるんじゃなかったっけ？
Aoko raised her guard and took half a step forward. Unconsciously, from an objective standpoint, it almost looked as though she were protecting the figure beside her. Alice's silence grew even heavier. Her eyes, fixed on the ground below her, were devoid of emotion. An indescribable sense of dread and pressure laid calm over the plaza.
金
As he strained his ears, he could make out the faint ringing of a bell echoing in the distance. The rippling sound wave seemed unbelievably to be emanating from under the ground.
なあ青崎あの子
黙ってて。
Sojiro stepped back, trying to stay out of the way. It was as though he had been told to go to hell, for the crime of asking if this girl was Akko's friend.
そうね。仲間思いに当てはまるかは微妙だけど、別にあなたの仕事を疑ったわけじゃないわ。
それはどうも。どうせならもう少し早くその良くない予感とやらに気づいてほしかったけど。でもま、ご覧の通り自己解決したわ。夜も遅いし、さっさと帰っていいわよアリス。私の仕事っぷりを疑うわけじゃないんでしょ？
Their eyes locked on one another. Alice's stare was uncomfortably cold. Akko's was bold, daring Alice to air her complaints.
いえ、気が変わったわ。せっかくだし二人で帰りましょう。その方があなたらしいわ。帰りしな、人形の話でも聞かせてちょうだい。
らしいって何よらしいって。いいから帰れ帰れ、ぐうたらアリス。部屋に閉じこもって役に立たないムクドリでも作ってろっての。
Worthless birds? Wow, really? At this point, a sigh escaped Alice's delicate lips. It seemed that the black-clad girl was more astonished than angry.
青子、口にしたくないけど、本気？
Quietly, Alice questioned her roommate of nearly 2 years.
呆れた。 二人で秘密を守ると言ったのに、まだ半端にそっち側なの？それとも情でも移った？
別に情っていうより私の気分よ。だいたい方針なんてその場その場で変わるもんでしょ。気分ならなおさらよ。そっちこそ一度した約束は絶対守るなんて時代遅れなんじゃない？
The proverbial knives were out now. No quarter was given nor taken. Sadly, their partnership was one of convenience and had not reached a level of mutual understanding. Their version of friendship was both delicate and unique. When a conflict of opinion arose, each would refuse to budge until the other crumbled. Neither was concerned with the other's plight, and at least for now, that was how they liked it.
そうね。今の暴言はあなたらしいとは思うけど。
Once again, she let out a sigh even longer than the one before. Oh no.
言い争いは後にしましょう。そこの彼をいなかったことにするのは。
Finally, she struck straight to the point. As if making a move to move a chess piece, Alice lifted her slender finger. Oh shit. There's the fork. Even this simple action seemed mysterious to Sanjiro, the same boy who had been hunted by his classmate Ako Azaki and bore witness to an automaton. Ako's violence in an animated doll. Though perhaps far beyond the realm of logic, both these things were derived from reality. As surprised as he had been, there is no need to think of them as total mysteries. However, when a thing appeared out of thin air from a seemingly unrelated gesture, he had no word for it besides mysterious. Sojiro stood motionless, captivated by the strange performer's magic trick, as the girl's single finger magecraft turned into attack directed at him. Blue light flew from the side to repel it, annihilating it without a trace.
やば。
Aoko immediately regretted her reflexive shot.
どういうこと？約束を曲げただけじゃなく、ルールまで破るつもり？
The already chilled midwinter air plunged below freezing. Alice looked calm and collected on the outside, but in reality, she was sometimes even more hot-blooded than Aoko. Oh, yay. This was especially true when it concerned her familiars. Incidentally, breaking one would often result in a week of silent treatment. But against someone who mercilessly destroyed her things, Alice was prone to retaliate without
あっ
warning.
ちゃー、いつかやるとは思ったけど、ついに逆鱗に触れちゃったか。
Aoko sighed at herself, even she was exasperated by her own stupidity, yet she couldn't help but feel a pang of relief. She did not intend to make any excuses, and she had no regrets. She had broken the rules, then so had Alice.
青子。
なんていうか、
If anything, it took a load off her mind. After all, now there was no going back. Aoko never intended to break her own rules. If there was anything for Aoko to regret, it was putting too little power into her shot.
私的に今夜こいつに死なれるのは困るのよ。なんで日を改めて殺しに来てくれないアリス。
To Aoko, it was simply natural to take on a pro bona fide cause in defense of the innocent suspect.
それは市場？
悪い？一宿一般の恩義って割と大事にしてるの、私。
私との協定より。
ええ、時と場合によっては。
Sojiro's human rights had not yet entered the argument. The girls were busy pouring oil on each other's flames. The girl clad in black was the first to move, or rather to erupt.
そう。よくわかったわ、青子。 私は彼をここで殺す。あなたは彼をここだけ生かす。つまり私と戦うということでいい？
そんなのいいわけないじゃない。
Aoko bit back the retort. She was very familiar with Alice's magecraft, and knew painfully how many mystics were hidden in Alice's tiny body. The odds of victory were essentially non-existent, and once the first shot had been fired, Alice Grunning was without mercy. Whether facing a roommate or a friend, the most beloved family member or a stranger. Once Alice began to fight as a witch, she became a heartless, unflappable monster. Aoko advanced another half step forward as if to encourage herself. It was too late to back down now, and the situation was no longer a trivial quarrel over a witness. The bedrock of their so-called friendship had nothing to do with their individual abilities, and everything to do with being equals in will. That is why, in order to stay true to herself, Aoko had no room for compromise or deception.
もちろんあんたを殺すことになってもそこのバカは生かしきるわ。
Her magic surged hurled as they kicked into gear. Her body, which had been mostly dominant during the battle with the puppet, ignited, preparing to demonstrate its true worth.
それにどのみち最後には殺し合う仲でしょ私たち。
Her courage overpowered any fear she had for her opponent. Tuning her body, her magic circles to become like a barrel of a gun, Aoko fired a magic bullet. It was exceptionally basic magecraft formula. There was no nature interference, no creating of wind, parting of water, nor hesitating of decay. It was simply the process of converting the imaginary activity known as magical energy into something real before releasing it as heat. Thus, Ako's destructive power was equal to her supply of magical energy. The magical bullets that she had used against Surgical were among the most basic, simple action magecraft that did not require an incantation. At a present ability, Ako's main mode of attack, her magic bullet, could be fired at 3 levels of power. These were at the 2nd level. This required double action magecraft, a casting through activation of her crest combined with simplified incantation. However, without blinking, Alice dispersed the shot that Aoko had mustered all of her spirit to fire. Aoko tooted in frustration. A swift sneak attack that used a simplified incantation would not be enough to break Alice's guard.
相変わらずお堅いこと。そのから一段と独りよがりになってるんじゃない？
Aoko provoked Alice in order to disguise her own lack of composure. Somehow Alice seemed delighted by Ako's
売
bravado.
り言葉に買い言葉というやつね。こういう勢いだけのきっかけは初めてだけど驚いたわ。こんなくだらない理由でもその気になるものなのね、人間って。
Alice giggled. Smiling with heartfelt amusement, Alice gestured her left hand toward the earth. And there it goes. Stab, 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 stab. Countless utensils shot out from underneath the cobblestone paving the plaza.
しずきくん、後ろに飛んで。
She grabbed his hand as she shouted, jumping backwards before he even had a chance to respond. As if they had wills of their own, these utensils had suddenly appeared from the ground and gave chase. As the barrier of spears grew around them, Aoko and Sojiro put some distance between themselves and the clock tower.
これで終わり？
Just under 30 feet stood between them and Alice. The lethal weapons that had crumbled the stone beneath them fell short of what Akko had anticipated. They now encircled the clock tower, making the scene look like the burning of a witch at the
普
stake.
通逆じゃない。ここは私たちを逃がさないよう槍で周りを囲むものでしょ。
Path behind them was safe. If they wanted, they could try to make a break for the main gate and escape.
いいのアリス。悪いけど逃げられるなら逃げるわよ。私。
If she could just make it back to town, it would be Akko's win. All she wanted to do was let Sojiro get away for the night so she could get him back to the city. So if she could get him back to the city, it would be fine. For the most part, mission accomplished. Oh shit.
Huh?
Or so she had thought. Without even offering a glance at her targets below, Alice carefully and lovingly pulled out a bottle from her pocket.
緑のフラスコあれって確か。やばとにかくファイ
Ah, the plates now are blocking her. Shit. Her shot was deflected with ease. Gone was Akko's earlier bravado. It was only natural. Aoko had indeed grown as a mage. Over the last 2 years of studying, her studies had progressed well, and she's more or less gotten the grasp of her roommate's tendencies and abilities. This had made her conceited enough to believe that, under favorable circumstances, she would be able to show Alice a thing or two in a fight. Alice uncorked the magical bottle. Oh shit. A gentle breeze caressed her cheek. Ah shit. Diddle Diddle fled as a new player stepped onto the stage. But from where would it enter? The sound of footsteps, a nostalgic parade approached. The Ferris wheel turns on. Oh no. Oh, the whole amusement park's turned. Oh shit. That means it's Kitsy.
ヤ。そう。
What emerged was a miracle that Akka, the apprentice mage, had never witnessed. The dead came to life. The imminent awakened. The wood were enveloped by the mist. Fire-breathing lizards lurked in the swamps. Puppets made merry at midnight. Alice Cooder's slender fingers had transferred the entirety of the park, as if gently stroking the back of an
いいわ。
elderly cat.
ごっこ遊びをしましょう。青子。
Oh shit. For one night, the wasteland of dashed hopes and dreams were restored to its former glory. It was an immortal monster ready to devour reality. A dark fairy tale that, once unleashed, would never let its prey escape.
逃げられるものなら逃げてみせて。どこまで行けるかわからないけど、この夜を越えることができたのなら。
Her declaration marked the start of a desperate battle. The witch in black laughed at her friend. Her musical myth filled with affection, sadness, and innocent delight. Faded glory returned to Kitsyland. The neon glow of innumerable lights illuminated the night. Speakers filled the air with the sound of vinyl music. Merry-go-rounds, small and large, whirled around and around. All in all, it made for a mind-bending spectacle. It was certainly possible to power the facilities by transferring magical energy into electricity via alchemy. That said, simply supplying the park with electricity would not have brought back the life that which was broken. The young woman did this not by mixing chemicals into a compound, but by melting down divine providence into a witch's brew.
まずいわね。アリスのプロイは何個か見てきたけど、今回のは桁が違う。セット。
Stifling her anxiety, Aoko fired up the crest on her right arm. If magic circuits were a mage's engine, then their crest was software that assisted their magecraft. For a fledgling mage, Aoko, this was her trump card. All she had to do was supply magical energy to her crest-based formula. It may not have been the strongest magecraft, but it was hers, proof that she was a successor of the Onozaki lineage.
講師2層直流数も。
The pattern of her crest shifted to execute the formula, which then connected to her magic circuits. The process resembled trains crossing rails, a puzzle involving dozens of circuits. She constructed it as swiftly as possible without sacrificing the quality of its construction. Instant magecraft cast without incantation would not be enough to reach Alice Kunagi. Aoko had gauged the strength of Alice's defense with her initial shots. She would dial up the power 5 times the next time, driving 20 tons of force into her target. Alice had the protection of a thick, hanging fog and a dense barrier around her. However, this attack would be more than enough to pierce through both. If Aoko struck home, it could cave in Alice's chest and end the fight. At worst, it would at least knock Alice down from her position atop the clock tower.
そろそろいいかな。
As always, there was one guy who spoiled the deadly tension, pulling Aoko out of killer mode. Sojiro had been looking back and forth between Aoko and Alice in confusion.
それでどういう話になったんだ？
He said it like he might ask for directions for the train station. Normally she would have lashed out in response, but his deadly serious tone shocked rather than angered her.
信じられない。慣れてきた。
Aoko swallowed back a sigh and turned her focus to activating her crest.
交渉は決裂。ちょっと怒らせすぎた。あの子から見れば、まあいい機会だし、遊園地ごと私を亡き者にしようって腹ね。
Sojiro tilted his head as if begging for a simpler explanation.
私、割とあの子に恨まれてるから。捕まったが最後、どんな風に殺されるか想像すらできないわ。要するに、あんたも私も、あの子をどうにかしないと生きて帰れないってことよ。
そんなとばっちりだ。
まあ、そういうことになるかもね。
As Sojiro protested in a tone wholly inappropriate to the situation, Aoko let an air blast rip from her right arm. She was not aiming at Sojiro, though. A little earlier in the day, and Aoko would have been happy to do exactly that, but now her attention was focused on the girl in black atop the clock tower. Went through the fog. Ako's mind struggled to catch up to her astonishment. She had fired the strongest, fastest magic bullet she had the ability to conjure, and Alice blocked it. That much was to be expected. When Alice set her mind on defending herself, such an attack was child's play. But what just happened? Something Aoko had never seen before leapt to Alice's defense. A team of horses? A plague of locusts? No, those existed in the real world, unlike what Aoko had just witnessed. Normal creatures could not form like a spontaneous cloud of fog and dissipate just as quickly as the night sky. And there's Kitsy. Impossible things moved in impossible ways. Alice was not even supplying them with any power source. Those things never needed power in the first place. Those broken and discarded things did not follow the rules of mankind. This was an invasion of fairy tales. Compared to them, the automatron looked merciful. Automatron's puppets were products of magecraft, but even then, they behaved as puppets should. These newly animated things, however, were nothing of the sort. Empty vessels became living creatures, dummies wrapped into malformed beings. There was a fog so dense with magical energy it visibly spread to all corners of the park, bringing with it a monstrous welcome party that easily numbered over 1,000. Spurred on by the shuddering sensation running through her spine, Aoko fired a barrage of single-action magic bullets. Ah! Her pulse of attack scattered faultily. The knights of the merry-go-round soared into the sky. The green fire-breathing lizards flocked. The bakeries opened their doors once again, and human-sized loaves of fresh bread marched from their ovens as platoons of newly baked soldiers. Aoko and Sojiro were completely surrounded. The Ferris wheel creaked as it gently turned. The rickety train car raced about the roller coaster tracks with Kitsy, tears streaming down his face aboard. It was a glossy, twisted fantasy. The girl in black reigned over the insanity-fueled park. Oh, now we're screwed. Aoko was fixated by the scene unfolding around her. Then she realized what was happening. Alice had once told her of Meister's familiars. Among them are three particularly notoriously, one of which she recalled being capable of something similar to this, and it was called say flat snack. Struck by Ako's bullets, the creatures exploded into splinters. It was clear Ako's shots were becoming more powerful, but it was also the case that these beings were less robust than your average Amatra. Ako turned away from the clock tower, grabbed his hand, and began to run. She shouted as though trying to persuade herself as she valiantly cleared a path. Ako's magic bullets flew like a scream, blowing away creatures that blocked or simply gathered around their path. She made a hole for them to escape through. Magic bullets exploded like blue fireworks. Ako and Sojiro ran down the bumpy brick road. Their bond, forged in the heat of battle, went far beyond mutual convenience. They headed for the park's exit at full speed without exchanging a word or a look. The weirdness only extended as far as the park's border, so they would be safe as long as they made it outside. But, speaking of pure numbers, the difference in strength as two versus an army, or rather one versus an army. Sojiro was hardly useful in this situation, and manpower wasn't really the issue here since they were facing puppets. Aoko shouted as she blasted away the monsters that stood in their path. There was no time to stop for breath or even to look back. As Sojiro pursued, his voice too was had naturally become shrill. 5 minutes earlier, they had broken out of the siege at the plaza surprisingly fast. It seemed that the residents' awakening differed case by case, with larger creatures taking additional time. Aoko joked as she mowed down the small fry that popped up. But then, without warning, something outrageous extended its way down from above them. It was the claws of the 60-foot lobster adorning the roof of a seafood restaurant. Its pincers were like a guillotine. So Aoko and Sojiro cut across the front of the restaurant. The Red King pressed in at tremendous speed, keen on splitting them each in two.
しずきくん U ターンこっちはダメ
The gate was just on the other side of the restaurant, but they had to take the long way around in order to lose the giant lobster snapping at their heels. Waiting along their detour had been a horde of monsters too many to count.
なんとかギリギリ
Shinjiro called out in response, recalling just how narrowly he had avoided his head being severed clean from his body.
手前うわなんだあれ焼きたてか
そうみたいね要するに下級兵士よ
Aoko halted her sprint and set her crest into full operation.
7、6、5メートル
At
あの
this
程度なら
distance.
スナップだけで事足りる
Oh, that's still her reading. Sliding along the brick path, she brandished her right arm. She loosed a shower of magic bullets. Snap was a single action spell that favored rate of fire over power, and it mowed down the monsters with satisfying
青崎
pops.
そっちも
了解
Blue explosions bloomed along the lamplit promenade. Ako's curtain of fire fanned out. It was a marvelous summer mine fireworks show. The toy bread men turned to charcoal.
数でこそ押されてるけどこの状態が続くなら逃げ切れるしずきくんそっちはい
ない空いてるここからなら入り口の東側に出られるはずだ
Uh-oh. With a magical barrage that would leave an average spellcaster blue in the face, the novice mage broke through the siege. One of the birds. Meanwhile, single bird keenly watched everything unfold. Oh, shit. The moment the blue bird descended into its master's field of vision, it made its high-pitched call. The girl listened expressively to the report.
構わないわ予想通りよ撃つこと壊すことしか脳がなくても青子の魔力の使い方は波じゃないから
The rabbit flapped its wings as it tweeted in response. Perhaps it was criticizing Alice for complimenting Aoko. Perhaps it was jealous of Aoko for being praised by Alice. Alice could barely make sense of his chirping rant. Aoko was a novice mage. Till just 2 years ago, she had grown up with no background in magecraft. Compared to Alice, who was raised as a witch from birth, Aoko possessed far less talent and experience. There was simply no comparison to be made. In the contest of skills in magecraft, 10 times out of 10, Alice would be declared the victor. However, that narrative changed when it comes to a battle for life or death. Alice was not the type of mage suited to combat, while Aoko, Azaki, on the other hand, was built for it. In a contest that pitted magical energy against magical energy, even Alice would concede that Aoko had the upper hand. Ako's manipulation of magic energy was extraordinary. The scale of her magic circles was smaller than that of Alice, but the rotational speed, durability, and output quality, not to mention efficiency, were otherworldly. That was Aoko Azaki's hallmark. Though she had many failings when handling specific formula, in just 2 years of practice, Aoko had surprised Alice in simple formula that merely required an energy input. She also had a genius's instincts and adaptability. Though Aoko was not particularly proficient at executing magecraft, she was terribly fast. She had been born outside the Ozaki clan. If she had been born outside the Ozaki clan, she would have doubtless risen to fame as a competitive sharpshooter.
でも残念ね
In a straight shootout, Alice did not stand a chance. Alice Kuronagi just never bothered to learn primitive magecraft like magic bullets in the first place. She was a classic puppeteer. Her familiars served as her arms and legs to carry out all the particulars of a battle.
制限時間には気づいているわよね青子魔力はいくらでも貸してあげるけど あなたの魔弾はあと半時で値崩れするわ。
Chirping as if in agreement, the robin took flight. It had been nearly 10 minutes since Alice had made the amusement park into her domain. To what would the green fog give birth next? Aoko and Sojiro, still running about, would soon come to understand the gravity of their situation.
しずきくん、正門ってこっち？
ああ、その店を曲がれば出口だ。
Running nonstop at full speed had them at their limits. Their breath ragged, the duo rounded a corner at a breakneck pace. Amusement park, although it was still the infamous Kidsyland. It would have taken a high school student 20 minutes to sprint the entire circumference of the park. And though they were now intimately familiar with the park's geography, it was changing beyond recognition. The transformation was not limited to the park's residents either.
青崎、
何を？
言いたくないんだけど、この遊園地広くなってないか？
It was. The problem wasn't as mundane as mistaking the location of the exits, nor the strange terrain. No, the park was wrapping and twisting in upon itself. Even as they ran, the structure was expanding and growing, like that of a living creature. Soon, the pair noticed that the mob encircling him had grown even stronger. Entrusting her back to Sojiro, Aka summoned all her efforts just to keep from whining. No one would blame Sojiro for cowering in shock, but for Aoko to do the same, she bore responsibility for causing and then dragging him into this mess. She could not afford to succumb to panic.
大丈夫。落ち着け私。遊園地の果てはある。遠いけど、鉄柵はちゃんと見える。フラットスナークだって制限なしってわけじゃない。外に逃げるって選択は正しいはず。現状、外までは目算で1キロぐらいだけど。
Up until now, they had become too concerned with simply running. Their breathing had become labored. They had to run another mile without rest. They would end up collapsing along the way.
体大丈夫か？
え？
The whisper from behind pulled Aoko back to reality.
大丈夫だけど、ちょっと一息入れたいわね。
賛成。ここから休みなしで外周まで走るのはやめた方がいい。
驚いた。しずきくんも外まで走ろう派とは。
She let slip a giggle. Far from deliberate by panic, her comrades had been analyzing their situation and forming an escape plan.
ちょっとだけ建物に逃げ込むのは。
気は進まないけど、それしかないわね。
The breadman had them completely surrounded. Perhaps this might have been a problem for the average person, but for Aoko, breaking through their formation to get to the building would be a cinch. The issue was...
問題は、どんな店を選ぶかってこと。
She concerned the characteristics of the transforming park, what would pose a danger and what was safe. The most important factor was not the strength nor the complexity of the buildings.
そうだ。選ぶならあの単純さで正しいはず。しずきくん、あっち。
After running the monsters, Aoko hot behind the counter, soon followed by Sojiro.
カウンターに隠れてて。
Like she was in a western shootout, Aoko squared off against the monsters using the counter as cover.
ビンゴ。ここならスナーク化しないんだ。
After assessing the current state of the enemy, Aoko sat down under the counter.
あいつらは。
And with that, we are going to end this session here. I do hope that everyone did enjoy it. And YouTube, you're going to keep getting more. Because, well, what series is next is what we'll get.